The 11 a.m. advisory just came out, and so I'll go over the details along with a few things that we've observed here in the past few hours. Hurricane Douglas continues to be a dangerous hurricane with maximum sustained winds a little bit lower now at 85 miles per hour. The Air Force Reserve hurricane hunters have been flying around the system all morning and are showing that the weakening trend that we were anticipating has finally resumed. So that's a little bit of good news, although it's still 85 miles per hour is still a pretty nasty hurricane for the state of Hawaii. The track of the center, based on reconnaissance, looks like it passed about 45 statute miles east-northeast of Hana at about 9 o'clock this morning. So again, uncomfortably close to a hurricane that's passing by just to the north. Luckily, the south side, at least in the direction of motion, with Douglas moving toward the west-northwest at 16 miles per hour, that puts us on the weaker side of the system. So most of the hurricane force winds that we can see from reconnaissance and also from radar are on the west and north and northeast side of the circulation. So we are hoping that we will continue to see a west-northwest motion during the day, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The headlines for the main Hawaiian Islands remain the same at this point. We are just too dangerously close to the center of a hurricane, and so we are keeping a hurricane warning up for Kauai County, Oahu, and Maui County. Tropical storm warning remains in effect at this point for Hawaii County, the Big Island. And we also have a tropical storm warning now that extends from the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument from Nihoa to French Frigate Shoals, and also out to Morrow Reef. So that's out over the northwest Hawaiian Islands in terms of that tropical storm warning. We do expect that Douglas is going to continue to move on a west-northwest track over the next couple of days, but that track is going to come very close to the islands. And our forecast track, while it may look like a straight line, we put a forecast point at 12 hours and we put a forecast point at 24 hours. That does not preclude the idea that we could have some wobbles or some adjustments to the motion. We know that hurricanes, as they move along, they don't move in a straight line. They tend to zigzag a little bit. And so we are very concerned that one of those little zags, if it were to occur close to one of the islands, could bring drastically worse weather as it moves across. So again, that is why we have the hurricane warning in effect. That said, even if it follows the projected path, we will still be on the periphery of some pretty nasty weather. So we're keeping an eye on that as we go through the day. We do expect that some gradual weakening will proceed with Douglas as it encounters a little bit stronger wind shear now as it's getting closer to the western end of the island chain. The wind shear is a little bit stronger, and so we would expect to see gradual weakening, but the sea surface temperatures are still plenty warm to support a hurricane system as it moves on its point of closest approach to each island. The timing really is not any different at this point. Maui County will probably see the peak of the worst conditions that we're going to see on Maui over the next few hours before Douglas starts to gain a little more latitude and move away from Maui County. Again, Oahu still looks to be in the zone to receive tropical storm conditions, and those would probably occur starting mid to late afternoon and then on into the evening. So your time, if you have any last minute preparations, it's time to wrap those up and figure out where you're going to go to shelter for the afternoon into the evening hours. And then Kauai will be a little bit later, and they could see the worst of the conditions after dark this evening on into the night. And so again, we're watching radar really carefully at this point. We really don't want to see any leftward jog to the eye, but if we do, again, that could bring drastically worse weather to the islands than what we're getting right now. So it's something that we're watching really carefully, and we hope that you guys will stay tuned as you're sheltering this afternoon. Again, we always talk about the hurricane being a triple threat. And so not only do we need to consider ourselves with the possibility for wind damage, and remember that those winds will be accelerated by terrain. So if you're near the mountains or around the mountains, then you can see much stronger wind gusts in those areas. The other threats, of course, are the combination of very high surf on east-facing shores, 15 to 25 feet, along with a storm surge of, say, 2 to 3 feet, adding to the water level rise on east-facing shores. So you need to be paying attention. If you live close to the shoreline, you need to think about the possibility of whether you might want to move inland in order to shelter for the storm. And it's probably not a good idea to wait until conditions get bad. The best time to do that is before the storm hits and gets our way. Finally, we do expect some heavy rainfall with Douglas. It's moving, again, fairly quickly, so not quite the catastrophic rainfall event that we saw from Hurricane Lane a couple of years ago. But that said, 5 to 10 inches of rain, localized amounts maybe up to 15 in the mountains, and all of that falling in a short amount of time can really cause a lot of problems, cause destructive, life-threatening flash flooding that might lead to water rescues if it materializes. Hurricanes bring a tremendous amount of moisture with them, and so you need to keep that in mind, that you can get sudden thunderstorm development anytime around a tropical cyclone. And some of the viewers may remember that from Tropical Depression Darby a few years ago, that we got an intense amount of rain and intense thunderstorms that blew up over the islands and dropped several inches of rain in just a few hours, caused some damaging flash flooding. And that's the kind of rainfall that you can see when you get tropical systems moving through. I think that's about it for the things that I wanted to touch base on for the 11 a.m. advisory. And we have some time for questions if anybody would like to ask.
Well, we do have a couple questions in the box. So let me ask you first, is a direct hit for Honolulu County still possible?
Yes, we do think it's still possible. It's probably not the most likely solution right now, but when you're forecasting a hurricane to go 40 miles or so north of Oahu, any little jog to the left would bring much worse conditions to the main Hawaiian Islands. So that's a big concern. And there is some model guidance that suggests that that's possible later today, that we may see Douglas take a little more of a westward jog or a westward track for a while before resuming a west-northwest track. It's well within the margin of our error for that to happen. And so, again, that's why we have the hurricane warning in effect. It would be too late if we waited to issue a hurricane warning until we were absolutely sure it was going to happen. Then at that point, you wouldn't have enough time to get ready. So we've done that ahead of time to give folks a chance to prepare, so that if it does materialize later this afternoon or this evening, that you have had the time that you need to get ready for a direct hurricane strike. The short answer is absolutely yes, it's still possible.
Next question is, so are we indicating that this is going to be more of a wind event than a rain event? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, a lot of the tropical systems that affect the islands come in as a weakening type system. Well, Douglas is weakening as well, but I mean like a tropical depression or the remnants of a tropical depression. We know that those bring tremendous amounts of rainfall. And in fact, it's not uncommon. Sometimes you see greater amounts of rain in the weaker systems than you do in the stronger systems that tend to be moving right along. The weaker systems are more tend to be slower movers. But so in this case, with Douglas, it's not going to be a major catastrophic rainfall event, even if it were to come in directly. But still, that's where we're talking about 5 to 10 inches, possibility of 15 in the mountains. That's not incredible rainfall for Hawaii, but it's still enough to be significant and life-threatening if we get that rain in a short amount of time. And so we're really paying attention to that as Douglas goes by to the north of the islands. I don't know if that completely answered the question. I guess you wanted to know about the wind. And so, so the wind is potentially damaging threat, of course, especially if Douglas makes a little bit more of a southern jog or jog a little toward the left or toward the west during the day today. And we're going to be watching the radar like a hawk to see if that happens. So far, so good. Keep your fingers crossed. And I'm hearing the hurricane sirens right now.
Yes, Bob, next storm. Is there a storm that you're remembering that behaved similarly to Douglas?
Yeah, in my mind, there were a couple systems. Of course, I'm not getting any younger, so maybe my memory is not as good as it was, but Ignacio and Lester, I think both passed to the east of the islands in the last few years and had sort of similar tracks. I think they were a little bit farther away from the islands than this close approach that we're seeing with Douglas. And then also Hurricane Fernanda, the year after Iniki in 1993, did something kind of similar. It wasn't exactly like this. And we also had Hurricane Daniel in 2000, which came up parallel to the islands, but a little bit farther offshore. But we did issue watches and warnings for Hurricane Daniel in 2000. So we've had systems that have done this before, although this one is uncomfortably and dangerously close. So we hope it continues on its happy west-northwest motion and gets farther away from the islands with time, but we got to keep a close eye on it over the next 6 to 12 hours.
Okay, Bob, and so the final question while I sit here drinking my 4th cup of coffee since 4 a.m. While many of you are remote, can you provide some color on the mood, the morale at CPHC and at the office here? Tense, exhausted, relieved? What's the overall vibe amongst the team?
I think everybody's doing well. Of course, there are some added challenges because of the pandemic, and we're working our ways around them. We're finding new ways to make sure that we're communicating safely. I have a mask right here, so when I leave my office, I put my mask on. We're wearing masks when we're moving around the building. We train for this. This is why we are here for hurricane threats to the main Hawaiian Islands. So everyone knows their job, and we keep a good training program in place to make sure that when systems threaten the islands, we know what to do. We know it's not generally a common occurrence. I mean, most of the time here, the weather is really quiet, and we enjoy that just as you do. But we know that when the weather gets dangerous, you're counting on us, and we want to do the best job we possibly can to support the state of Hawaii.